Are you keeping it? Jihoon hadn't planned to ask it that way. He hadn't planned to ask it at all. Not that night. Not standing in the doorway of Naomi's apartment 4 days after the ultrasound room had rearranged everything he thought he knew about himself. But it came out before he could architect it into something better, something less blunt, something that didn't sound like a man who was still, even now, leading with logistics instead of love. Naomi looked at him. Not with anger. Something quieter and more unsettling than anger. Come inside, Jihoon, she said. He came inside. Here's what the comments got right. Hundreds of you watched that first story and said the same thing in different words. The ultrasound proved the pregnancy. It didn't prove anything else. The timeline matched. The medical explanation was real. But proof of conception is not proof of character. And Jihoon Park, structural engineer, man of confirmed facts and load-bearing certainties, had built his entire response to this situation on a foundation that the ultrasound had cracked, but not repaired. Because here's what nobody tells you about the moment after someone is proven wrong. The moment after is not relief. The moment after is not reconciliation. The moment after is a room where two people sit with the full weight of what just happened, and neither of them knows what the weight is supposed to become. That's where part 2 begins. Not in the exam room, in everything that came after it. The question he'd asked at the door, "Are you keeping it?" was not cruel. Naomi understood that. She'd spent enough time with Jihoon to know the difference between cruelty and the particular kind of emotional stumbling that happens when a man who processes everything through logic is standing at the edge of something logic cannot reach. But understanding where something comes from doesn't make the landing softer. She sat on the couch. He sat across from her. And she said, "That's the second time in 1 week that your first question has been about the situation instead of about me." He said, "I know." She said, "I need you to notice that." He said, "I'm noticing it." She looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said, "I'm keeping the baby." He nodded once, slowly. "Okay," he said. And she waited because there had to be more than okay. There had to be something on the other side of that word that told her where he actually was. "I want to be involved," he said. "Whatever that looks like. Whatever you'll allow. I want to be there." She said, "That's not the same as wanting us." He said, "I know. I'm saying both." She breathed out slowly. "I need you to understand something." She was not looking away. "I am 35 years old. I am carrying a child I did not plan and did not expect and am absolutely terrified about. I was just accused of infidelity in a medical room in front of 5 people. I have not slept properly in 6 days." She paused. "I do not have the capacity right now to also manage your feelings about all of this while trying to hold my own together." He said, "I'm not asking you to manage my feelings." She said, "Then stop leading with your uncertainty and start leading with something that tells me I'm not alone in this." The apartment was quiet. Then he said, and this was the sentence that changed the temperature of the room just slightly, he said, "You're not alone in this. Not dramatically. Not with the performance of a man trying to be believed. Just the words, plainly, the way you say something when you finally understand that saying it plainly is the most powerful option available." She looked at him for a long time. "Okay," she said. Just that. "Okay." What nobody told Naomi Carter about the weeks immediately following that appointment was how physically relentless it was all going to be simultaneously. She was already 9 weeks pregnant when the ultrasound happened. Her body had been doing its work quietly and completely without asking anyone's permission. And now, with the secret out and the situation detonated and her emotional reserves running on fumes, it was still doing that work. Louder now. More insistently. The nausea arrived every morning at 6 like a debt collector who didn't care what else you had going on. The exhaustion was not tiredness. It was the specific weight of a body redirecting everything it had toward something it had decided mattered more than your comfort. She would sit at her design studio desk surrounded by fabric samples and mood boards and feel, sometimes, like she was watching her own life from a slight distance. Like she was both the person building things and the person quietly coming apart at the seams. And these two people had agreed to share the same body for reasons neither of them fully understood. What she had was Claudette's presence. Steady and fierce and entirely unwilling to pretend things were fine when they weren't. She had her closest friend Priya, who started sending ginger chews in the mail and voice memos at odd hours saying, "I love you, you're doing amazing, also what do you need?" And she had a therapist she'd started seeing alone, because she was smart enough to know she needed somewhere to put things that didn't have Ji-hoon's name on them. Her therapist's name was Dr. Sandra Webb. 50-something, warm but precise. The kind of woman who listened with her whole body and whose silences said more than most people's sentences. In their third session, Naomi said, "I keep waiting to feel angry at him." Dr. Webb said, "What do you feel instead?" Naomi thought about it honestly. "Grief," she said finally. "I feel like I'm grieving a version of us that I thought existed. A version where he would have chosen trust instead of fear. And I don't know how to stop grieving it and also try to build whatever this new thing is supposed to be." Dr. Webb said, "Those two things don't have to happen in sequence." Naomi said, "What do you mean?" "You can grieve what you lost and build something new at the same time. They don't have to wait for each other. The grief doesn't have to be finished before the building can start." Naomi sat with that for a long time. Ji-hoon started therapy that same week. He found a Korean-American therapist named Dr. Paul Shin, a deliberate choice because Ji-hoon understood, in the way you understand things about yourself that you wish weren't true, that he was going to need someone who recognized the specific architecture of what he'd grown up inside. The particular way silence gets passed down through generations like furniture. The specific weight of being a man from a culture that treats emotional expression as a private discipline, not a public practice. In their first session, Ji-hoon described the ultrasound room with engineering precision. Sequence, events, outcome. He told Dr. Shin what happened in the order it happened. Dr. Shin listened to all of it. Then he said, "When you said that's impossible, what were you actually feeling?" Ji-hoon said, "I already told you. I heard what you were thinking," Dr. Shin said. "What were you feeling?" "Terrified," Ji-hoon said finally. "Of what?" "Of being someone who could be left," he said. "Of the Dubai months meaning something I couldn't see. Of having chosen someone who was quietly building a different life than the one we were supposed to be building together." He stopped. "And when she told me she was pregnant, my brain didn't go to how is this medically possible. It went straight to the fear. Like the fear had been sitting in a drawer for 8 months waiting for something to attach to, and it found it." Dr. Shin said, "You turned a medical mystery into a confirmation of your worst fear." "Yes." "Without asking her. Without even telling her the fear existed." Silence. "I put it in a drawer," Ji-hoon said. Dr. Shin nodded. "Tell me about the drawer." What the next several sessions uncovered was not a simple portrait of a villain who needed to apologize and move on. It was something more complicated and more human than that. Ji-hoon Park was a man who had learned to carry fear the way other people carry keys. Always present, rarely examined, entirely functional until the day you reach into your pocket and what comes out is not what you expected. His first marriage had taught him that love is not enough if you cannot communicate it. He had absorbed that lesson, but he had carried it the wrong way, not as an invitation to communicate better, but as evidence that intimacy was fundamentally dangerous. That the closer someone got, the more they could see the distance between what he felt and what he was able to say. The vasectomy, Dr. Shin pointed out in their fourth session, was not purely a medical decision. "You chose a procedure that made certain emotional risks impossible," he said. "No children meant no family fracturing the way your marriage fractured. No child watching two parents be unable to bridge the distance between them." Ji-hoon said, "I thought I was being responsible. You were being safe. Those are different things." Ji-hoon looked at the window. "And now biology has done something your caution couldn't prevent. And instead of turning toward the person you love with the reality of it, you turned toward the drawer." "I turned the drawer into a verdict," Ji-hoon said. "Yes. I found her guilty before I even asked the question." "Yes." He was quiet. "That's not who I want to be," he said. Dr. Shin said, "I know. But wanting not to be someone is different from doing the work to become someone else. The wanting is the beginning, not the arrival." 3 weeks after the ultrasound appointment, Ji-hoon showed up at Naomi's door with something she wasn't expecting. Not flowers. Not food. Printed list. She looked at it when he handed it to her, standing in her doorway in the early Atlanta evening. It was a list of every remaining OB appointment through her due date. Dates, times, the name of Dr. Osei's practice. Next to each date, a single note. Available. Will be there if you want me there. Not I'll be there. If you want me there. She looked up at him. He said, I'm not assuming anything. I know I don't have standing to assume anything right now. But every one of those dates is cleared. I've told my team. I'm not going to Dubai or anywhere else, for any reason, until this baby is born. Unless you tell me it's okay. He paused. I'm not going anywhere. Naomi looked at the list for a long moment. Then she stepped back from the door. Come in, she said. Now, and this needs to be said directly because the comments demanded it and the comments were right. Several hundred of you watched part 1 and said the same thing in different words. The DNA test still needs to happen. You were not wrong. What the ultrasound confirmed was a heartbeat and a timeline consistent with the Smoky Mountains week. What it could not do was provide the genetic certainty that this situation genuinely required. Not because Naomi had done anything wrong, but because Jihoon needed to be able to stand on ground that didn't shift, and his own decision to trust her, however real, was not stable enough to build a family on. One bad day, one moment of fear, one reopened drawer, and it could all unravel again. Naomi understood this better than he did, and she brought it up first. They were sitting at her kitchen table on a Sunday morning, 12 weeks into the pregnancy. She was eating toast, the only thing that reliably stayed down. He was drinking coffee. The morning was unhurried in the way Sunday mornings are when neither person has anywhere to be and both people have too much to think about. She said, I want to do the prenatal DNA test. He looked up. Not because there's any doubt on my end, she said, but because I need there to be no doubt on yours. Permanently. Not your decision to trust me, because that can waver. A piece of paper cannot waver. He was quiet for a moment. You shouldn't have to do that, he said. I know, she said. I'm choosing to anyway, because I'm building something here and I need the foundation to hold. I need us to hold. She looked at him steadily. And for us to hold, I need this question closed by a lab, not by willpower. He said, okay. She said, say more than okay. He said, I hear what you're doing and why, and whatever that result says, I want you to know I'm already committed to this child and to you. But I understand why you need the paper, and I'm grateful you're giving me that. Even though you shouldn't have to. She took another bite of toast. The appointment is Thursday, she said. I'd like you to come. He said, I'll be there. The results came back 11 days later. Dr. Osei's office called on a Tuesday afternoon. Naomi took it alone. Standing in her design studio surrounded by the ordinary evidence of the life she'd been quietly building, while everything else was falling apart and coming back together simultaneously. Probability of paternity. 99.998%. She stood there for a moment after she hung up. Then she called Jihoon. He answered on the second ring. She said, the results came back. A pause. And his voice was careful, controlled in the specific way he controlled things when he was most afraid of what came next. She said, it's yours. The silence on the other end was not the silence of a man who had doubted her. It was the silence of a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had just been given permission to set it down. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Naomi, he said, just her name. But the way he said it, like it was the only word that meant anything, like all the language he'd spent his whole life organizing and disciplining had finally reduced itself to this one sound. She felt it. I know, she said quietly. The weeks that followed were not fairy tale weeks. They were the real kind, the kind where two people are doing the unglamorous work of rebuilding something while life continues to require things of them regardless. But something had shifted. Not fixed. Shifted. It showed up in small things first. The way he started texting her in the mornings, not to check in, not to demonstrate he was present, but just because something had made him think of her and he'd said it. A Tuesday in mid-June when she'd sent him a photo of a crib she liked and he'd responded 40 minutes later with a photo of himself in the store standing next to it with a tape measure. And the caption said, it fits. Also, the assembly looks complicated, but I'm choosing not to be afraid of it. She had laughed so hard she'd had to sit down. It showed up in the evenings when he came over and cooked. Not because she'd asked him to, but because he'd figured out quietly, through observation rather than instruction, that the second trimester had brought the nausea down but the exhaustion up, and standing in a kitchen at the end of a workday was something she had less tolerance for than she used to. He didn't announce this. He just started showing up with groceries. She noticed. She didn't say anything about it for 2 weeks. Then one evening she said, "You've been doing that thing." He was at her stove. He looked over. "What thing?" "The thing where you handle something without being asked and without making it a production." He said, "Is that a problem?" She said, "No. I just wanted you to know I see it." He turned back to the stove. "Good," he said. What happened next is something neither of them planned. It was a Tuesday night in mid-July, 15 weeks into the pregnancy, the second trimester well established, the baby now the size of something that had opinions about position and made them known at inconvenient hours. Naomi woke up at 2 a.m. Not nausea this time. Just awake, the way you are sometimes awake at 2 a.m. when your body is busy with things your brain wasn't consulted about. She reached for her phone. There was a text from Ji-hoon. Sent at 1:47 a.m. "Can't sleep. Thinking about that week in the mountains. The morning you made coffee wrong and you were so confident it was right. I was thinking about it and I was laughing alone in my apartment. Just wanted you to know." She read it twice. Then she typed, "It was not wrong. You just have no taste." 3 dots appeared immediately. "You used an entire cup of sugar. It was a tablespoon. Naomi. It was a generous tablespoon." And she laughed. Actually laughed, alone in her bedroom at 2 a.m., and it was the first time in weeks that something had felt entirely like them. Not weighted with what needed to be repaired. Not careful with what hadn't been said yet. Just them arguing about coffee in the middle of the night the way they used to. She typed, "Go to sleep, Ji-hoon." He typed, "Good night." Then after a pause, "Thank you for not going anywhere." She looked at that for a long time. Then she typed, "Thank you for showing up differently." She put her phone down. Outside her window, Atlanta was doing what it does in the deep middle of July, warm and dense and indifferent. The baby shifted. She put her hand on her stomach. "I know," she said quietly, to no one in particular. "I know." Sung-jin called Ji-hoon on a Sunday in August. Ji-hoon had not spoken to his brother since the day Sung-jin walked out of that exam room. The day Ji-hoon had not responded to whatever Sung-jin had said to him in Korean on the way out, because there was nothing to say that didn't require more honesty than he had available in that moment. Now he had it. He answered. Sung-jin said, in Korean, "How is she?" Ji-hoon said, "She's good. The baby is healthy." "I shouldn't have come that day," Sung-jin said. Ji-hoon said, "No. I thought I was protecting the family." "I know what you thought," Ji-hoon said. "But there was no threat to the family. There was just a woman telling me something true that I wasn't ready to hear. And you being in that room made it worse." Sung-jin said, "I know. I need you to apologize to Naomi," Ji-hoon said. "Not because I'm asking you to. Because you were in a room where she was being questioned and you stayed. She deserves that acknowledgement directly from you." "Okay," Sung-jin said. "She may not want to hear it right away. That's entirely her right. But the offer needs to come from you." "Okay," Ji-hoon said. "And Hyung, next time something is happening in my relationship and you think the family needs to show up." "I know," Sung-jin said. "I won't." The apology happened on a Saturday in late August. Naomi was 19 weeks pregnant. She was tired and direct and entirely clear that she did not owe anyone a gracious reception. She'd told Ji-hoon that. He'd told her she was right, but she chose to hear it. Sung-jin came alone, without David, without the authority he'd carried the first time. He was a different man in a living room than he'd been in a waiting room, less imposing, more simply a man in his 50s who had made a decision he regretted and was figuring out what accountability looked like from the inside. He said, "I know I can't change what happened. I know my being there made something hard worse. I'm sorry for that." Naomi looked at him steadily. She said, "I wasn't a problem that needed family oversight. I was a person in a vulnerable moment who deserved privacy. He said, I understand that now. She said, I hope you do. Then, because she was Naomi Carter, thank you for coming. She meant it, not as forgiveness, not as everything being resolved, but as recognition that he had done the harder thing. It was easier not to come. He came anyway. Sometimes that's the whole of what you can offer someone. September, 22 weeks. The baby had a name now, private, just between them, chosen on an evening when Jihoon had been reading a list of names aloud from his phone and Naomi had been lying on the couch with her feet up, half listening, until he said one name and she went still and said say that one again and he said it and she said that one. It was the first truly private thing they'd had since all of this began. It felt like a door closing on something and opening on something else. There was one more question that needed answering. Because some of you asked it in the comments with a sharpness that the story deserved. Does he actually love her? Or does he love the idea of being the man who fixed it? Jihoon asked himself this exact question in Dr. Shin's office on a Thursday morning in October. The Atlanta sky outside gray and soft and unhurried. He said, how do I know the difference between loving someone and loving the version of yourself that loves them? Dr. Shin said, what made you ask that today? Jihoon said, she was sick 2 nights ago. Really sick. Up since midnight. Exhausted. Couldn't keep anything down. She didn't call me. She said she didn't want to wake me. He paused. I found out in the morning when she texted to say she was okay. And I felt, he stopped, organized it. I felt like I'd been cheated out of something. Not angry at her. Just I needed to be the person who was there. Who handed her the water, who sat on the bathroom floor with her. Not because it would have made me feel like a good partner. Because I couldn't stand the thought of her being in the dark alone. Dr. Shin was quiet for a moment. That's your answer, he said. Jihoon said, that's it. The distinction you're asking about lies exactly there. A man in love with his own image wants to be seen being present. A man in love with a person cannot stand that she was alone when she needed someone. Jihoon sat with that. I called her after, he said. I told her I wished she'd woken me up. What did she say? He almost smiled. She said she knew I would have come and that's exactly why she didn't call. Because she wasn't ready to need me that much yet. Dr. Shin said, and how did that land? Jihoon said, like the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me. The last week of October. 36 weeks pregnant. Full term was close. Close enough that Dr. Osei had begun using the word imminent at appointments with the casual certainty of someone who had said it hundreds of times and meant it every time. Naomi had a bag packed by the door. She had a list on her phone. The kind of list that a woman who designs spaces for a living makes when she is preparing for the most undesignable event of her life. Everything accounted for. Everything in its place. What she had not accounted for was 3 a.m. on a Wednesday. She woke with the specific kind of discomfort that was different from the other discomforts. Not the familiar weight, not the familiar pressure. Something that had a rhythm to it. Something that arrived and released and arrived again with a regularity that her body seemed to understand before her brain caught up. She lay there for 6 minutes timing it. Then she picked up her phone. Jihoon answered on the first ring. She said, I think it's time. There was no pause. No are you sure or how far apart or any of the questions she had half expected. He said, I'm on my way. He was there in 18 minutes. She had timed it later and that was the number. 18 minutes from her phone call to his hand on her door, which given Atlanta traffic at any hour was either a minor miracle or evidence of speeds she chose not to ask about. He came in and she was sitting on the couch in the specific upright position she'd learned was the most manageable one. And he sat beside her and put his hand over hers and she looked at him and they were both, in that moment, exactly as frightened as the situation warranted. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. I'm not ready, she said. I know. Neither am I. She looked at him. That's actually comforting, she said. He said, good. They arrived at the hospital at 3:42 a.m. Claudette met them there. She had been Naomi's emergency contact since before Jihoon was anything, and Naomi had called her from the car. And Claudette had said approximately 4 words that communicated everything including I'm already in my car and I love you, and you are going to be absolutely fine. The labor was long. 14 hours is the honest answer, and anyone who has been through 14 hours of labor or been present for it knows that 14 hours is not a narrative. It is a series of intensities separated by recoveries, and the time does not pass the way time usually passes. What Jihoon did during those 14 hours was stay. Not in a performative way. Not with grand gestures or the kind of presence that announces itself. He stayed the way a person stays when they have decided that this is where they belong and they're not looking for credit for it. He held her hand when she wanted her hand held. He stepped back when she needed space. He got ice chips when Claudette gestured for ice chips. He said nothing when saying nothing was the right answer and said, "You're doing it, you're right here, I'm right here," when those were the words that were needed. At one point, hour 9, when things were at their most intense and least romantic, and Naomi was somewhere deep in the specific geography of labor that exists outside of language. She looked at him and said, between breaths, "Don't you dare disappear." He said, "I'm not going anywhere." She said, "I mean ever." "I know what you mean." And she held that for a moment, held it the way you hold something you needed to hear when you couldn't have explained that you needed it. Then the next contraction arrived and the conversation ended the way conversations end during labor, which is to say it ended completely and immediately and was replaced by the only thing that mattered. At 5:17 p.m. on a Wednesday in late October, in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air and something new that didn't have a name yet, a baby cried. Not the kind of cry that fills a room with drama. The small, emphatic, entirely certain cry of a person who has just arrived somewhere and would like everyone to know it. The nurses moved. Dr. Osei spoke in the calm, efficient voice of someone who has done this hundreds of times and understands that the people in the room need steady more than they need ceremony. Jihoon was standing at Naomi's side. He had not moved. He was looking at something that had, weeks ago, been a heartbeat on a monitor that nobody in a crowded exam room had been prepared for. He was looking at the specific, physical, undeniable reality of a life that had insisted on existing despite everything. Despite the vasectomy and the fear and the accusation and the 5 months in Dubai and the drawer that had been labeled "What if she's already somewhere else" and all the other things that could have ended this before it became what it now, unmistakably, was. A nurse placed the baby on Naomi's chest. And Naomi, who had been steady through all of it, through the exam room and the DNA test and the 14 hours and all the months between, made a sound that was not quite a word and not quite a name. It was just sound. Pure and involuntary, the way some things are when they arrive from somewhere deeper than decision. Jihoon put his hand on the baby's back. Tiny. Warm. Breathing. He looked up at Naomi. She was looking at him. They didn't say anything. There was nothing that needed to be said that wasn't already in the room. Later, much later, after Claudette had come in and cried in the way she would have described as not crying if anyone asked, after the nurses had done what nurses do, after the initial intensity had settled into the quieter intensity of two people and one new person figuring out what comes next, Jihoon sat in the chair beside Naomi's bed. She was half asleep. The baby was asleep on her chest, small and certain and entirely unconcerned with everything that had preceded this moment. Jihoon was looking at them both. After a while Naomi said, without opening her eyes, "You're still here." He said, "Yes." She said, "You didn't have to stay." He said, "I know." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Jihoon. Yeah. I forgive you." She said it quietly, without drama, the way you say something you've been carrying for a long time when you finally know the time is right. Not because everything is fine. Not because what happened didn't hurt, but because you did the work. And because, she stopped, because that fear you had in the exam room, the one in the drawer, I understand it now in a way I didn't then. Because I have my own version of it. He said, "What's yours?" "That I'll love him so much," she said. "That I'll forget to protect myself. That being needed will feel so good that I'll stop asking whether I'm being chosen." Jihoon was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I choose you. Every day I choose you. Not because you're the mother of my child. Because you are the person who walked toward the hard conversation instead of around it every single time. Because you gave me a piece of paper I shouldn't have needed and did it without making me feel small. Because you said thank you for showing up differently, and those 5 words hit me harder than anything anyone has ever said in my direction." She opened her eyes. She looked at him. Don't stop, she said. Showing up differently. I won't, he said. I'm still learning. But I won't stop. Outside the hospital window, Atlanta was doing what Atlanta does in late October. Beginning to let go of summer, not yet committing to anything colder, suspended in the particular amber light of a season between two seasons. Inside, something was sleeping. Strong and steady, the way a thing is when it has decided to exist and nothing in the world was going to convince it otherwise. Fear makes people cruel. Proof doesn't erase damage. Trust is fragile. And love, real love, the kind worth the work, knows all three of these things. And shows up anyway, every time.